Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Varjo webinar. I'm really excited to be presenting again. Today, we're going to be talking about using virtual reality to power collaborative medical imaging. I have a really great group of panelists, and we have a really exciting new use case as Varjo gets more and more involved in medical imaging. If you're not familiar with Varjo, just to give a bit of background, we are a virtual reality and mixed reality hardware company that also has some software solutions that we're coming out with this year. So currently we make and sell enterprise grade mixed reality and virtual reality headsets. We feature human eye resolution in a bunch of our headsets, and we also have a novel solution to mixed reality, which is a video see-through device in the XR3. We are founded and based in Helsinki. We have a US office here in Arlington, Virginia, and we sell into 40 different markets, so we're quite global at this point. We have the highest resolution mixed reality devices at 115 degrees horizontal field of view, and also all our devices have 200 hertz eye tracking, which we're seeing more and more uptake with this year. So we're going to be talking today about medical imaging. But we've also, just as a quick preface, we've been getting more involved in medical training and other medical use cases this year. I'm really excited about all of it. So in this video, you can see some work that we did with Layerdal's R&D team in Denmark. And then we've also been getting more involved in things like dissector lab human anatomy training. This video here in the bottom right, you can see is a software partner we work with called Touch of Life Technologies that we're seeing get adopted across a bunch of different institutions in the US and hopefully soon in Europe as well. One thing that I'll call out is we normally get a lot of great engagement in these sessions. We get lots of great question and answers. So please feel free to make liberal use of the Q&A tool. We're going to leave some time at the end, probably a generous amount, to answer different questions. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat. Some of us will type answers if it's a quick one-line answer, or we'll have a chance to discuss them with me and the panelists. So I'm really excited that for who we have on the panel today. My name's Jeff Bund. I'm head of software partnerships in North America for Varjo. With me, I have Chuck Martin, who's a staff interventional radiologist at the Cleveland Clinic, Mike Wesolowski, who's the CEO of Luxsonic and an adjunct professor of medical imaging, and Avez Rizvi, who's a chief medical officer at Luxsonic and a board-certified radiologist. It's super exciting to have you all here with us, and I can't wait to talk about radiology. And I'm wondering if you, Avez, might be able to tell us a little bit about VR reading rooms versus traditional reading rooms, and what set the stage here, what we're talking about as far as radiology reading rooms, and the difference between like VR and traditional one.
Sure. So essentially our reading room consists of, as if you look at the image on the bottom, you'll see that there's multiple monitors, something like 4 or 5 monitors typically is what we use. And then there's a pretty large desk that has all of these monitors on them. All of our peripherals includes things like our keyboard or mouse. And then there's a big giant tower computer that kind of drives all of this together. And we use this to bring images to our actual, from the actual source to our workstation. And so with VR, we're basically creating a digital twin of this. And what I'll do is I'll pass it really to Mike to kind of discuss some of the work we're doing within Luxsonic about this.
Thanks, Evan. Yeah, to your point, medical imaging is really at the core of modern healthcare. We diagnose and monitor thousands of conditions, diseases, and traumas using medical imaging. And really, radiologists work with all other physicians across healthcare to care for patients. So if you've ever gotten an X-ray, that digital data sort of starts at the X-ray machine and passes through a whole bunch of systems and ends up in the radiology reading room. And from there, radiologists like Aves or Chuck, they review your images. And they spend about 80 or 90% of their day in that reading room. And you saw from that picture, really, that the reading room is sort of a complex workflow. Even though it may not look like it, everything in that reading room is extremely important for the radiologist. Everything from the configuration of the computer monitors to the lighting in the room needs to be calibrated and adjusted for each individual radiologist. So the issue with that is that it means that radiologists can only really work in that reading room. They can't work on a laptop like you or I can. So they need the reading room. So that limits access to those resources. So the idea with Sievert and what we've been building is to create that digital twin of the reading room, virtualize the whole thing, and make it portable so that radiologists like Aves and Chuck can now use the same resources that they would have in that whole room inside a small VR headset. So that's really the goal of Sievert. And what you're seeing in this video is sort of a view from the inside of the headset. You can see we've replicated all of the hardware and the software in VR that the radiologist needs to do their work.
Yeah, thanks for that, Aves and Mike. So one thing that we'd like to discuss a little bit is a day in the life of a radiologist and the difference between diagnostic and interventional radiology, and how this software can apply to either or both. So I'm wondering, Aves, if you could tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So I think we mentioned a little bit in the beginning about how these images are sent digitally and to our workstations, and then we kind of go over them. A diagnostic radiologist spends most of their time in that reading room setting going over a number of cases. Those cases could be coming from, for example, the emergency room. They could be coming from inpatient setting within the hospital. They can be coming from outpatient settings. And we typically read all of those cases, and some radiologists are subspecialized in their field in diagnostic radiology, so they focus on a particular subsection or subfield of radiology. For example, musculoskeletal radiology or neuroradiology. These are still diagnostic fields. Interventional is more hands-on, and I'll let Chuck explain what he does on a daily basis.
Thanks, Aves. Hi, everyone. My name's Chuck Martin. I'm an interventional radiologist at the Cleveland Clinic. What an interventional radiologist does is we are a subspecialty within the field of diagnostic radiology, in that we perform minimally invasive procedures using image guidance, many oftentimes catheters and wires, along with different imaging modalities, whether it's ultrasound, CAT scan, MRI, or fluoroscopy, or real-time X-ray, as you see in the middle picture here. It's because of these different arenas in which we practice. It's one of the many reasons why I found the Sievert technology so interesting for use in this capacity.
We've sort of set the stage for what radiologists do and what a reading room looks like, but I'd like to do maybe a little bit of a deeper dive into the software itself, like how it works, what it looks like, and how you used it at Cleveland Clinic. So I have some videos about the standard layout versus using it for education, and then also the 3D versus collaborative session. So I'm wondering, Chuck or Mike, if you could talk us through how the software works in detail, and then how it was used at Cleveland Clinic.
Yeah, maybe I can start off, and then I'll hand it off to Aves as well. So as I mentioned earlier, we've done a lot of work to try and mimic the physical space of a reading room in virtual reality. So in this video, you can see we have three large screens that can visualize effectively DICOM medical images. Whether those are CTs or X-rays or ultrasounds, we can include all of that in, yeah, we can read all of those images effectively. So we've really done a lot of work in trying to mimic that traditional experience for the radiologist, really to reduce some of the friction of adoption. You know, virtual reality is still, even though it's been around for 40 years commercially, we still are just at the beginning of really adoption in a lot of these new areas. And so workflow is very important. So we've really tried to mimic that traditional workflow. Avaz, do you want to talk a little bit more about the applications on the education side, especially given your experience in on the residency side?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can talk about it and then probably hand it off to Chuck to talk about specifically at CCF. But in general, you know, residents, when they come in, they don't have access to a workstation. It's usually the case that the radiologists who are actually working at the institution, they have their workstations, or there's a shared reading room in which there are multiple workstations where residents can work at. When we thought about how to best educate residents, we thought, okay, what are the things that are important? Number one, access to an actual workstation is important. So you can actually go through the images and have the same workflows you would have on a regular workstation. The second thing is integration points for your teaching cases, things where you can really push to our system and be able to see those things. And then ultimately, mobility and the ability to collaborate with your fellow residents and with your attending. So, for example, if there's several residents who want to go over a case together, they typically have to go into a reading room, find an open workstation, and then all huddle around it to kind of get a good view of what that case is. With virtualizing all of this, you have instant access to the workstation, you have a mobile device, and you can virtually collaborate with as many of your co-residents and with attendings as you want. So that's where we feel it's really nice with medical education in particular. You know, I'll pass it to Chuck and he can talk about some of the stuff they're doing with medical education at Cleveland Clinic. And then maybe I think, Mike, you might want to talk about some of the other things like 3D that we do.
Thanks, Avaz. So yes, so currently right now we're involved in a usability study assessing the CBER technology and some of its kind of use cases in the healthcare space. What I find so interesting is a couple things. With the assistance of Ronaldo Zavala and the Channel XR team, they were really instrumental in kind of helping us kind of get the study going at the clinic. Essentially, what we've been doing is using the CBER technology and just kind of asking some of our residents who have been working with us to just put the headset on and to really kind of get a sense for what the actual physical how comfortable they feel in this environment versus the workroom. As everybody's previously discussed, when you look at shows like, I guess I'm dating myself here, Grey's Anatomy or The Doctor, any of those other shows, and you see, a bunch of residents kind of huddled around a hospital bed, and they're kind of talking and having rounds. That's for some of the other services, some of the other clinical services around the hospital. That's kind of where the learning happens. For radiologists or radiology residents, radiology fellows, all of that happens around the physical workstation, especially in the diagnostic world. In the interventional world, it's either in the physical interventional suites or kind of intermittently as we're kind of going in and out of the suites and or kind of reading cases, or sometimes kind of doing both. As procedures finish, you're able to kind of step away and spend some time at the workstation. What I found so interesting about the technology is that kind of given the portability, given the headset and the software, it actually allows us to do all of those things in a much more fluid, portable, convenient manner. Essentially, when you step inside like a radiology reading room, we have multiple monitors. It's not just, let's say one laptop. It's typically anywhere from 3 or 4 different screens, if not more. And we're working with either multiple pieces of software, but we're bringing in, kind of MR, CT, ultrasound, and we're using that information in addition to the electronic medical record to kind of correlate multiple pieces of data to provide the most comprehensive report that we can. In the midst of that, we're working and we're engaging with residents. And what I found so great is, kind of Jeff, like you alluded to, and Mike, as you talked about, the technology's been around for a while, and nonetheless, I think that Varjo's done an incredible job of bringing this technology to such a you guys have done such a great job with regard to the level of the technology, and then when you mix it with a piece of software like this, we're actually able to pretty nicely demonstrate what's going on in a reading room, and to do that in a little bit more of a portable manner. The goal of our study is to just kind of get a sense from residents, using standardized imaging data sets, what their thoughts are. Is it easy to manipulate the images, evaluate different sets of images, looking at previous studies, current studies, things like that. If you could do all of those things in a similar fashion that's significantly more portable, I think that could be of, we think our hypothesis is that it could be of tremendous use in a healthcare setting, kind of given, sometimes limited resources, or sometimes, in a facility like ours, when we're doing them over multiple sites.
Yeah, and do you have any direct feedback from the residents that you can share with us? Like, how did it go?
So the study's still ongoing, but I can kind of, without giving away, some of our, our data, I could comfortably tell you that, for one thing, the residents have been, uniformly, impressed with the technology. They've been kind of blown away that you can, be able to simulate so much to such a high degree in the current format. And everybody's really kind of had a very positive kind of positive sentiments on where they've felt like you're able to actually kind of complete the tasks of a radiologist kind of in this format.
Yeah, and do you think that there's any benefit to some of the Varjo features, like higher resolution or mixed reality? Like, how do you feel about that? I mean, I know we're all biased here, but is there anything that you think you can do with a higher resolution headset that you can't do with a different one?
Well, I think that that's going to be, the higher resolution is going to be kind of key. I mean, the screens that we use, not only do we have multiple screens, but the screens that we use currently, the monitors are of a pretty significant resolution already. In addition, a normal reading room has to be, of a reasonable darkness, to allow a diagnostic radiologist or even an interventional radiologist to ideally interpret the images in the most appropriate manner. And given the fact that we were fortunate enough to use these our systems that had such a high resolution, I thought it was kind of ideal in the current in our current study to kind of introduce it in this capacity. And I think that that's been really kind of pivotal towards us getting the such positive feedback so far preliminarily.
Yeah, and one thing that I kind of wanted to touch on is you had mentioned before that radiology reading rooms tend to be a place where people congregate to communicate about the solution. And so there is some sort of interest in the replication of that in an immersive environment, especially during COVID.
Yeah, it's what's interesting is it's been really it's been really interesting to kind of initiate this study, in these kind of crazy pandemic times. just because in many ways, unfortunately, there were stretches of time where we didn't have trainees in the hospital just out of concern for health and safety. So to have the ability to let's say collaborate kind of remotely, or the ability of people even in different hospital systems, in a kind of in a future state, to be able to kind of discuss different cases and such. I think that there's a tremendous benefit to that, or utility to those such opportunities as that.
Yeah, I'd follow up on that, Jeff. I think what we're seeing really, collaboration in VR, it's much more natural than trying to do it even on like a Zoom call like this. You really feel present in the space. Yeah, there's a little bit of an example. I mean, of course, right in this example, we just have blue avatars that represent everyone, but looking at those subtle movements of the head, being able to hear someone, being able to interact with that data together, I think is a really powerful tool. Avaz, I'd love to hear your opinions on this, and how you see collaboration with your colleagues in CVER.
Yeah, 100%. So, in this example, like with this video, it's actually one of my good friends and also a mentor by the name of Dr. Woojin Kim. And we were just demonstrating that we could sit and go over a case of a fracture of a wrist and all the significant details associated with that fracture. And it's like Mike mentioned, there's this concept of presence where we feel we are actually physically there. And I think that's very valuable, to know that I'm sitting next to Woojin, and in this case, Mike as well, and going over this case. It makes it more cohesive and real. Not to say that Zoom and conference calls aren't good too, but they're just not optimized for a workstation setting. So you can't have 4 or 5 different monitors, 3 different monitors, where you can share amongst the different folks in the room and seamlessly go through the cases. It's hard to do that without passing controls, and it's difficult in a conference setting. But within CVER, because it's mimicking our actual workflow as radiologists, it's very seamless. I can literally pass the baton to Woojin, and he can go and start describing certain findings. He can point things out with his laser pointer, ask me questions. So again, from a teaching and collaboration perspective, it's actually quite useful.
We have this question that I think is relevant from the audience. How many people are generally using the headsets at the same time in these rooms? And like, I would add to that, like, do you see a lot of variability? But what's the typical use?
We've tested our system with up to 10 people in the room. 3 to 4 or 5, that's the average, I would say. But we're only kind of really limited by our bandwidth. I mean, one of the other amazing things about immersive technologies, you see in that video, you're in a nice home setting. That could just as easily be an auditorium, and you could have 1,000 people interacting with that space at the same time. And we're seeing that more and more with, virtual, like real, I don't know how to say it, virtual reality, I guess, based conferencing systems like CVER. We're seeing more and more across industries. So we're really only limited by our imaginations and by bandwidth in a lot of cases.
If you could talk a little bit about how CVER is made and a little bit about the tech stack behind it.
Sure. So CVER is made within the Unity software engine. We have done a lot of work extending that software engine to be able to integrate with medical informatics workflows. So as I mentioned before, there are standards in radiology. So we have imaging standards. Those, as I mentioned earlier, DICOM images are stored on picture archiving communication systems. So we need to integrate with PACS systems. We need to be able to integrate with radiology information systems, the electronic medical record. All of the work to do all that integration has been built into the platform. We can work on PCVR systems like the Varjo, but we also have all-in-one systems, albeit they're able to do less. So, for example, you know, on the Varjo, especially when we're looking at 3D images, or if we want to do things like pre-surgical planning with volumetric data, you know, the Varjo, we really need that extra from the PCVR system. And obviously the clarity and the resolution of the Varjo put it, you know, ahead of many other headsets that are on the market right now. So that's the basic tech stack is, you know, we're built on Unity plus a whole bunch of other stuff that we need to do to integrate with medical imaging informatics systems.
Yeah, this actually, we have a question that's very close to this, which is, are there any network security limitations with the headsets with HIPAA constraints, especially in current remote or mobile work environments?
So we are HIPAA compliant. So we do a few different things in the back end to make sure that we are, you know, following HIPAA regulations and PIPEDA regulations in Canada. So we do some work to, you know, on the cybersecurity side to make sure that we are compliant with HIPAA. Avez, I don't know if you want to add anything there.
Yeah, I mean, not too much here. I mean, in the sense that all of these sort of image manipulation, image transmission tools, there are standards on how we can actually send this information and be compliant, and we follow all of those standards. And so, you know, that's as much as I would say in terms of whether or not we are following it. In certain situations in which you don't actually need to have the patient information, for example, just for teaching purposes, right? Sometimes you don't need to know some of the demographic information for the patient. We also have the ability to remove that demographic information on the back end before it's actually sent to the device, so that if residents just want to go over some cases by, you know, de-identifying some of the demographics, we can do that as well. So I think from both ends of it, whether it's used in an enterprise setting for the purposes of actually taking care of patients in the future, that's going to be fine. And then from a medical education perspective, where you don't need all that demographic information necessarily, we can provide that as well.
And I should mention that all the data you're seeing here is dummy data. None of this is real patient data.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. If I'm sorry to interrupt, but you know, just with regard to our study, you know, all of the images that the residents have looked at, our Sievert has or Luxsonic has partnered with RSNA, and we have a standardized set of images to allow for a greater degree of consistency with regard to the research study. But then on top of that, it's allowed us to kind of you know, look at things across different modalities, whether it was MRI, CT, or ultrasound on the headset.
We also have a great partnership with Radiopedia. I just wanted to let everyone know that as well.
What is Radiopedia?
So Radiopedia is an encyclopedia, online encyclopedia for radiology, and it also provides teaching cases, so self-directed teaching cases. So we've incorporated multiple libraries of teaching cases into Sievert, both from Radiopedia, RSNA, as well as some of our own teaching cases. And we're always looking for partners to work with. You know, the thing I should mention with Sievert, it really has been designed to be a hub for medical imaging within VR, and it's designed to be extendable. So we often work with partners if there's functionality that we don't have in the core Sievert product, we'll work with partners to integrate it, pretty much like a marketplace. You know, so some of our work with NVIDIA, which is highlighted here, you know, we're integrating Clara from NVIDIA, some of their AI tools to be able to do advanced visualization and full machine learning workflows actually within CVER.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a pretty good segue into, well, what I'd like to do next, if we could, is talk a little bit with Chuck about what's next at Cleveland Clinic, and then also, as you alluded to, what's next for CVERT and Luxsonic. And then we also have some questions from the audience that we can address about, kind of roadmap and near future things going on with this. So, Chuck, how do you see this taking shape in your work?
Well, thanks for the question, Jeff. In a couple ways, I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier in that, for one of my favorite things about my, the work that I do is that, we're pretty mobile over the course of the day. We're kind of either bouncing between multiple interventional suites or, going from like a reading room to the interventional suite, or the reading room to work with some of our colleagues in the ORs, or just engaging with patients. And I think that for one, I think that the medium of mixed reality is incredibly powerful, and I think that we're not even scratching the surface on its utility in healthcare. And then kind of just using the power of the software and how we use it in the hospital with the incredible resolution of your system, and really kind of trying to potentially consider exploiting some of that portability. There's quite often when we're in procedures, there are moments when we might need to look at kind of correlative imaging. If we're let's say if we're doing something and patients have had previous MRIs or CAT scans, but we might be using fluoroscopy or ultrasound. Sometimes, while for the most part, when we perform these procedures using that image guidance, we're just, we have like a mental idea of where everything is, but there are moments when we might have to refer back to patients' previous imaging, things like that. Having the portability of looking at those images and then looking at them in different ways, I think that could be really powerful. So my hope is to continue to work with the Luxsonic team about potentially launching into studies along those lines.
Yeah, thanks for that. That sounds very exciting. And I know that actually dovetails fairly nicely with some other studies going on outside of Cleveland Clinic that we're embarking on this year. I mean, Mike, can you talk a little bit about that, or should we?
Yeah.
Are we able to?
Yeah, I think so. I think to Chuck's point, having access to workflow is important, and we're developing. There are multiple workflows in radiology. The machine learning that we're talking about here can be used in a whole bunch of different areas within radiology on the diagnostic side, but also in helping with interventional procedures or other procedures. So in the near term, we're developing a machine learning module which will allow us to more quickly develop machine learning models in VR, but also to integrate those into the actual platform. For Luxsonic itself and for CVERT, we have authorization as a Class 2 medical device in Canada. We're going through FDA approvals in the US as well. So until then, we won't be able to use CVERT for diagnostic purposes. But as we've mentioned, collaboration is really important in medical imaging and across healthcare. And so we're looking at several ways to be able to use immersive collaboration within the healthcare system to improve efficiencies, but also to improve access to resources, right? If we look globally, we've got 5 billion people who don't have any access to radiology services whatsoever. So that's a huge number. And part of the way that we can start addressing that is to being able to really share resources, especially radiologists and expertise of radiologists globally. So one of the projects we're working on, which I can't talk too much about, but effectively what we're doing is we are connecting radiologists from the US to radiologists in Ecuador, and allowing them to collaborate and to consult over images in a much more efficient way than they can do that now. So basically joining in the virtual reading room and having, interprofessional and intercontinental, I guess, collaboration amongst healthcare professionals, I think is a really, really interesting use case. And we're seeing a lot of excitement about that.
Yeah, and just because we're getting quite a few questions about this, can you comment at all on the bandwidth and latency relationship there? Do we have any hard numbers around that? I don't know off the top of my head, but what do you find as far as bandwidth requirements? Is latency an issue?
Yeah. Ideally, we have, with an internet connection of 5 megabits per second or higher. So it's not actually that high of a requirement. Communication within CVERT is pretty efficient. It's not much different in terms of the collaborative aspect isn't much different than what we're doing right now. In fact, it's probably lower bandwidth requirements. The issue comes when we're uploading cases. So the higher bandwidth just means that you can upload a case faster. But once the case is uploaded and distributed, then the collaborative aspect doesn't require huge bandwidth at all. And we do some tricks in the background to be able to distribute cases in a way that's efficient during a collab session.
And then also, while we're on the kind of future roadmap stuff, we've been getting some questions about hand tracking and eye tracking. I think hand tracking is probably a quicker answer, but do you see any future for hand tracking in CVERT? Is that something that you all will look to implement, or do you think controllers are a better solution right now?
Avaz, I'd love for you to answer this one.
Yeah, I mean, the future of virtual reality in general and how we're going to use it in the enterprise, I think is probably a broader question. But to kind of go a little bit more micro on it in terms of radiology, we are creatures of habit. So we typically use a mouse and a keyboard to go through all of our images. And it's not necessarily the most natural way to do things, but it's the way that we've learned and done it so far. What VR does is it opens up several opportunities to use the unlimited resources you could potentially have in a VR setting, the number of monitors, your hands to kind of reach out and actually touch the anatomy and circle it and annotate things in ways that we don't typically do it, but could be quite more efficient than what we're doing right now. So there's an opportunity there for sure. And we're definitely exploring that at Luxsonic. We have some great ideas that we're not going to tell you so much about right now because we don't want to give away all our secrets. But we really do see this as a paradigm shift in the way clinicians look at medical imaging, and there are some incredible opportunities there. The point about eye tracking is also interesting because if you're looking at it from a quality assurance perspective or even a medical education perspective, tracking how radiologists look at images and how they interpret the image for a particular diagnosis, as you can imagine, can be quite important for both those categories, quality and also for educating residents. And then taking aggregate amounts of that data and potentially using like AI to say, hey, you might want to look here, is useful as well. So we have lots of ideas on how both of these things can be used in the future, and more on that to come.
Yeah, and Chuck, what are your thoughts? Would you use hand tracking? I mean, I think right now the trade-off is basically convenience over accuracy. I mean, do you see that as something useful in your environment?
Some of the hand tracking tools, I think that there certainly could be some utility there. Right now, the great majority of our studies, just kind of around some of the usability with regard to kind of the software and the interoperability. But to Avez's point, with regard to the eye tracking, I think that there are some really powerful opportunities there. Very much like, when you have, let's say, somebody who's an internal medicine resident or a family medicine resident, or actually any of the other clinical, any other of the other clinical specialties, whether it's even orthopedics, when, a patient comes in with a knee injury, an orthopedist is going to evaluate the knee in a particular way, a particular manner process, and that process is developed over the course of learning from others, from their mentors, from their teachers, and they're going to start in one place and they're going to systematically kind of go through how they evaluate that knee, and there's going to be a litany of questions that they ask the patient. Very much in the same way, when you look at radiology, diagnostic radiology, when we're looking at imaging, whether it's a X-ray, MRI, CAT scan, there's a search pattern, and there's a search pattern that you develop when you look at a study. And truthfully, while Avez and I are both diagnostic radiologists, we're also products of those who have taught us, our mentors, our teachers. So when he and I look at an MRI, it may be at a different pattern, but we'll cover the same exact structures. And there have already been, some really kind of powerful studies that have shown, search patterns with radiologists, with trainees, and that search pattern becomes more robust over time. And there are tremendous opportunities, I think, when you start to kind of assess somebody's search patterns and how those search patterns kind of develop over the course of training, that I think that you could really kind of leverage some really interesting kind of future studies from that information.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of our requirements from the aviator training programs we work in, with pilots doing instrument checks and needing to evaluate like the order of frequency and accuracy of those. So it's something that might be able to transfer over really well from that industry over to here.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's something that I think every industry, or every whether every profession, everybody has their own search pattern, to make sure that you don't miss anything. And whether it's kind of current training paradigms right now, future training paradigms using using systems, future training paradigms even using machine learning or AI. I think it could all be super helpful to not just assist with education, but as Avez mentioned, even in the quality sphere.
Yeah, thanks. I think we'll do only a couple more questions, but here's a quick one that I think our radiologists might be able to answer. Is like, can you compare the cost of ownership over a traditional setup with one of these VR setups?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and I'm glad whoever asked this, kudos to you. The cost of a workstation can be quite expensive. They can cost upwards of $30,000, and that's just the bare cost of some of the monitors. Some of the monitors are $10,000 or more, and so the cost of an equivalent headset sometimes can be much less, like 1/6 the total cost of the workstation. But even more so, you have to factor in the cost of the institution. So if you're building a reading room, you have to remember it has to have a certain level of lighting within it. So you have to have dimmer switches, and it has to be dark. It can't be any windows around. So when a hospital is being retrofitted or fitted for these reading rooms, it's an expensive ordeal. It takes up space from the hospital, and then per square foot costs are pretty high for these reading rooms. So in every which way you can think of, whether it's taking this reading room and deciding, hey, we don't necessarily need as many of those, or saying, well, let's not spend too much money on workstations because those are quite expensive and let's use them efficiently. both those areas are where we think that CVERT and using virtual reality headsets like Varjo are useful.
Yeah, thanks. Do you have any notes on diagnosing contrast agents in coronary arteries with VR? Or I guess we could extend that out more broadly to, what are the actual, granular imaging differences between, evaluating an image in VR versus on a flat screen?
Well, I'll jump in here first, and then I'd love to hear from my physician colleagues. So we've done a clinical trial here in Canada showing equivalency between reading in a virtual reality headset versus a diagnostic monitor. Our RADs found that there was no real significant qualitative difference or quantitative difference between reviewing in our system versus a diagnostic monitor. So anything you can do traditionally on a diagnostic monitor, you should be able to do within CVERT once we have, of course, the full approvals from regulatory bodies. So I'll leave it there, and maybe, Avaz and Chuck, you can talk a little bit about contrast agents and looking at contrast agents both on the 2D as well as potentially in volume reconstructed data.
Sure. So on the standardized data sets that we've looked at in for our study, preliminarily we haven't seen any difference with regard to kind of the ability to detect differences. The RSNA data sets that we've been using so far do have contrast enhanced studies. And they do have contrast enhanced studies with abnormalities that are, the size of, let's say, coronary arteries that are enhanced. So, you can see, subtle pseudoaneurysms, things like that, in some of those imaging or some of those imaging studies. But, I hope that might answer the question with regard to, we've only, that's how we've used it so far. So I can only really kind of speak to that experience.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not going to add too much to this in terms of the difference between contrast agents, so much as to say that there are very subtle things in radiology in which resolution is quite important. One example of that is mammography, where you're getting down to the level of seeing microcalcifications within breast tissue, which sometimes requires much higher resolution. And there are existing headsets, particularly like Varjo's, where you do hit that resolution and you can actually read those cases. So I actually don't see an issue with, in terms of, picking anatomy or even specific diagnoses, whether it's on a regular monitor or within one of these headsets. I think it's definitely possible.
I have another question. This is kind of an oldie but a goodie. Is eye fatigue an issue for extended use? I know we address this in a lot of our sessions, but because this is such a nice real world application, I'd love to hear, Chuck, like if you noticed anything at Cleveland Clinic, if there was a time limit, or if people really struggled out over extended use, or what the average also like use time was in headset for your users.
Well, so far on, I could only speak to kind of some of our preliminary work so far. We've had the headset on for with regard to kind of study participants for it's been 20 to 30 minutes, and there haven't been any reports of eye fatigue so far. I don't foresee that being the case in any of our trial participants. I've had a headset on for longer periods of time, and as somebody who looks at images for a living, I can't say that I've experienced any of that. I think that given the kind of the technical parameters of the system, I think that actually lends itself to the reason why I haven't been experiencing that. But I hope that's that information is helpful. It's really been actually and I could only speak to my personal opinion, but it's been a pleasurable experience using the headset.
Yeah, thanks. I guess having worked in VR hardware now for almost 10 years, I can say I think having demoed lots of people on different headsets with different images and things, I think there's a few things that Varjo does that adds to this, which is I think the most important one is that we have an automatic IPD adjustment. So that's actually originally why the eye tracker was built, was to actually create a mechanical actuation of the lenses to measure the proper interpupillary distance and adjust the lenses accordingly. So I think that that's actually one of the things that, whether it's been explicitly stated or not, has led to a lot of eye fatigue and simulator sickness and other things, basically just improper adjustment. And then we also have active cooling. We have a good amount of eye relief and less distortion. So I think all of those things kind of lead itself to less fatigue, less sickness, less discomfort than people are used to in like a consumer VR experience. I guess this is a good kind of one to maybe conclude with for our developers, is that are there any thoughts on designing a workstation that's completely different and optimized for VR? And what they're basically asking is that right now we have kind of this skeuomorphic design of replicating the familiar workstation in VR. Do you see any advantage to maybe making something that totally breaks from that, that's optimized for an immersive environment, or is that way too far in the future?
I think that's a great question, and the answer is absolutely. I think the reality is there's an adoption curve to new technology, and we've done a lot to minimize the friction for adoption of CVERT in radiology, but we're not necessarily leveraging the real power of immersive. There are many things that we can do, to your point, to optimize the environment, optimize interaction with that environment, and to really start to gradually transform the way that we review images. But Aves, maybe you can speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, and I think, Mike, you've alluded to the point that I was making a little bit earlier, that radiologists, we're creatures of habit. And, if you think about the transition from where we went, I'm sure everybody has seen those Hollywood, movies or TV shows where they hang film. Nobody actually does that anymore, right? Like it's all digital now. It actually shows up on your computer. And so, but from going from that to digital, if you look at sort of the workflows, it's very similar. In fact, we use some of the same terminology, like hanging protocols, right? Like that's what you would actually hang the film with, but it's actually made its way into the software vernacular. So my point is that we've kind of went from how are we doing things without digital and mimicking it into digital, and then now where once you go into the virtual environment, it's sort of a stepwise progression to say, how do we utilize this environment best for immersive? And we have lots of ideas on how to do this, but like Mike mentioned, you don't want to be so disruptive that nobody uses it because it's way too different from what they're used to. So you try to give them what they're used to so that the adoption is there, and then you start introducing, new ways of doing things in which we are confident, me and I'm sure Chuck as well, that radiologists will use those features because it'll make them more efficient, it'll make them happier, and it's just more natural. And so I think we are really keyed in and focused on that at Luxsonic.
Yeah, thank you. And unless anyone has any more concluding thoughts, I think we'll leave it there. I really appreciate you all joining me on this, and it's really been a great pleasure, and I'm super excited about all the work getting done at Luxsonic and Cleveland Clinic. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.